Mr. President, here's what we know about the so-called stimulus bill. The bill will give American workers $8 a week in their paychecks in exchange for passing along a $1 trillion debt to our grandchildren. The entire New Deal in today's dollars cost only half of what this bill costs. We know that if we were to save $1 million a day, every day since Jesus Christ was born, you'd still have less money than the cost of this bill. We know that if you were to add the cost of this bill to the national debt that we already have, it would cost each American household more than $100,000 to pay off our country's debt. We know that in the bill there's $50 million to save red-bellied mice in San Francisco, something that Speaker Pelosi has supported. We know that in the bill there's $8 billion for a levitating train from Disneyland to Las Vegas, something that the majority leader is very interested in. We also know that people are hurting, that we need to do something to help the economy, that something includes a real stimulus bill, but we know this is not the right approach. Mostly this is spending, not stimulus. Most of the spending in the bill does not come soon enough to help quickly. Most of the tax cuts in the bill, I mentioned the $8 per paycheck, $8 a week for working families. Most of the tax cuts are welcome, but not stimulative. We know that this is a lot of money. Another example of that is it took us until about 1980, from the beginning of our republic, to build up a cumulative debt that equals the amount of this bill. Or to look at it another way, the entire federal budget in the early 1980s was about the amount that we are spending in this bill. We know this is not temporary. Even though stimulus bills, as defined by Speaker Pelosi, are to be timely, temporary, and targeted, this is not. We know that because of the mandatory spending that adds to the budget. And we know that because the Senate rejected Senator McCain's amendment that said after 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth above 2%, the new spending would stop. So it's not temporary. We know that we're bailing out states with much more money than they need. In my state of Tennessee, it had an $800 or $900 million shortfall. That's a lot of money for our state. But our governor and our legislature are managing that with some pain. But we're giving Tennessee $4 billion, not just as if we had the money. We know that we're not seriously thinking about how much spending is too much spending in Washington and how much debt is too much debt. We know that we established policies in this bill, huge policies, in just 2 weeks without careful consideration in education, energy, and health that deserve enormous consideration. I used to be Secretary of the United States Department of Education. This budget today is about $68 billion. We're adding $40 billion a year to that department for the next 2 years. Does that mean we're completely satisfied with what's happening in kindergarten through the 12th grade? Or if we were to add $40 billion a year, should we not be asking what could we do differently to reward outstanding teachers, to create charter schools, to give parents more choices of after-school programs for their children? Surely we could have a debate about education or energy or health care if we're going to spend that much new money. We know there has been a lack of bipartisanship. The refrain seems to be, we won the election, we'll write the bill. That was not the tone of the election. That was not what we look forward to on the Republican side of the aisle. And we know what we should have done instead. We know that we shouldn't have spent the whole piggy bank on a spending bill that doesn't include much stimulus, that we should have reserved as many of those scarce dollars as we could to focus on fixing housing first and making sure that we don't underestimate the difficulty we have in getting the toxic assets out of the financial institutions in this country so they can start lending again. So on Main Street, we can start doing business again. We know those are the things we should have done instead. This bill doesn't pass muster with truth in labeling. It claims not to have earmarks, although that levitating train from Las Vegas to Disneyland looks a lot like an earmark. We know that the 2 provisions in the bill that seemed to do the most to help were cut by the conference report in substantial ways. And that was Senator Isaacson's $15,000 tax credit for home buyers who would buy homes in the next 2 years. That was gutted. And Senator Mikulski and Senator Brownback's effort to give encouragement to automobile and truck buyers all over America to revive the automobile industry. We know, Mr. President, that if we are to add $80 billion, $87 billion over 2 years to the Medicaid program in each state, that we may be making the program so rich that we'll never be able to decide what to do about it when we have our national health care debate. We're preempting that discussion without very much debate. Mr. President, I know what bipartisanship is. I've participated in it. When I was governor of Tennessee, I worked with the Democratic legislature. We became the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well. I said what I thought we ought to do, and the Democratic speaker said what he thought we ought to do. We sat down together.
The senator's spoken for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. We took some of Speaker McWhorter's ideas and some of my ideas. We came to a conclusion, and we together announced the result. President Bush and the Democratic and the Congress did the same thing with No Child Left Behind. President Bush working with Senator Kennedy and Representative Miller. Senator Bingham and Senator Domenici gave us a good example with energy. 70 of us co-sponsored what we needed to do with the America Competes Act. And the Gang of 14 helped keep the Senate functioning and produced good Supreme Court nominees. So, Mr. President, I'm disappointed that we have not risen to the occasion, and I hope that in the future, that on major pieces of legislation, this bill, which should have been easy to do in a bipartisan way, is not a symbol of what's to come with the more difficult pieces of legislation, health care, climate change, and entitlements. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.